But so what you hear this prosperity ministry, there's nothing wrong with preaching prosperity, because you have to understand Jesus or God did not want us to come here and suffer. But he said one thing: you've got to have faith and you got to do my work. Do the work of what you're called to do. So when you sit up and you're preaching prosperity ministry, these pastors need to come along and they need to tell them, you know, it takes work to do. But instead of just talking about it, they need to back it up a little bit. We're really getting into that, some of the things that church can do, you know, to go ahead and improve relationships. Jealousy, treachery, and envy. Always been up in the church. You know, one of my favorite sermons is Washington Dollars. And he went through, y'all heard it, right? Okay, great sermon. He went through and he talked about the church. Excuse me. The sermon was Watch Them Dogs. And I think it's by D.W. Watson. Yeah, Watch Them Dogs. Listen to that sermon. And what he does, he talks about the church. Different people in the church, the attitudes and dispositions of people in the church. And he analyzed them or compared them to different types of dogs. Very interesting church. And he talks about jealousy, he talks about envy, and he talks about treachery. Okay, all of that is in the church. And it should be. Because where do the church people come from? The world. The world is what? Full of corrupt. So when you bring people in, even though you bring them into a religious situation, they're still corrupt. Because it takes time to get into the Spirit of God. It takes time to walk in the light. So we're going to expect that, but we should call it out when we see it. You know, like the reason why I said Watch Them Dogs, he called his church out because of the way that they were acting in his church. This is not the way we do it, but he did it out of love. We're not doing that anymore. You don't hear pastors talking about anything. Oh, yes, you do. And this is not general. I'm not church bashing at all. But you hear pastors talk about homosexuality. They'll talk about that. But they don't want to talk about the issues that's going on in their church. You know, I read with this one woman, she's divorcing her husband after he's been having an affair with the church sister for 3 years. Now, 3 years, somebody, we grew up in the black church, somebody knew something was going on. Somebody knew. And for 3 years, she was just blind. Come on. Then the thing with Eddie Long. You know, somebody knew what was going on a long time ago. But because he's Eddie Long, nobody wanted to say anything to address him. So if you are talking, I'm a pastor, and I'm not talking about Eddie Long in particular, but if I'm a pastor, and I'm telling you this is the right way to do things, but then I'm going back the wrong way, I'm giving you too many fragmented teachings. You know, and that's what they're doing right now. You know, it's a hypocritical. You know, it's a lot of hypocrites in the church. It's just like it is in the world. But the church needs to take a more stance on it. If there's a problem in our church, we need to address that. And then if we're going to address it, we need to address it in a proper way. There should not be any arguments. There should not be any fighting going on. Because again, you don't come to someone to correct them out of hate, you come out of love. Because we're talking about the spirituality of Jesus. This is the way the church needs to be. But it needs to take control of what's going on there. Because the problem sets in there. If I'm looking for a church, and I go to a church and I see problems that's going on in this church, and I leave, go to another church. And I go to another church, same thing be happening. I start associating my 3 bad experiences with your church, and I say it's like that to all churches. You know, you want to break it down a little better? Same thing, they simply say, you know what, if one black man is the same guilty, they're all the same. You know, so it's the same mentality. They group us all together, and we do the same thing for the church. So we need to talk about love. We need to talk about acceptance. Because we're all struggling with sin, with spirituality. We struggle day to day. We have to have a support system that's going to understand and not just condemn us. When we walk into the church, we just don't feel that love that you used to feel back in the day. That's because there's too much going on. They're not involved in the community enough. I mean, with something big happening, you know, they get involved, you know, like it's Christmas time, you know, they might have a coat drive here, and there's nothing wrong with that, or they might have an initiative here, but they're not doing anything to me, that's just putting a Band-Aid over the issue. Because the problem is not the fact that the child is cold or the child needs a coat. The fact of the matter is the problem is that the mother or the father cannot afford the coat. That's where the problem comes in. So we have to develop ways to get involved with the community and make things a lot better for them. They don't have a social agenda. Only time they have a social agenda is when something big happens, like Trayvon Martin. When he got shot, you heard churches say something, but everybody wants to figure out how much of a travesty it was. And then once he was acquitted, you heard the church again. But you haven't heard heard since. And if you think about to the boy that got beat in Chicago, you know, the boy, the baseball bat, they beat him. So you heard about it, and you stop hearing about it. You don't hear anything like that coming from the church. Back in the day, they would stand out for justice. Nowadays, they just simply just being too quiet. They don't have a social agenda. Now, the question becomes, how do we bridge the gap? And we're going to take a little time on this because this is actually the most important part of my whole entire presentation. You know, again, we talk about returning to your first love, which is Jesus Christ. That's what the church needs to do. For years, the church has been known as Jesus Church because they preach the teachings of Jesus. Nowadays, you hear churches that are not talking as much about Jesus, not living the life of Jesus. So if the church is not living the life of Jesus, how can it expect its members to do the same? There's nothing wrong with personal piety. That's fine and dandy, but we need to go back to our first love because that's where spirituality is key. And I think that we also need to create a focus group. Now, when I mean a focus group, I'm not talking about just a church and its pastors. I'm not talking about just all pastors. I'm talking about pastors of all denominations. I'm talking about community leaders. I'm talking about if you own a nonprofit but you want to help young black men. Y'all, we should get everybody together in a respective neighborhood. We do a neighborhood at a time, and we can sit around here and get together and try to figure out ways we're going to stop this crime rate from happening and destruction of our kids. That's the reason why I stepped into the play. You know, I have to make my grandson, his life has to be a lot better than what it is now. Because how do I not know that 10 years from now, one of these hoodlums that we saw in the earlier won't kill my grandson? We have to make the world a better place, but we're not focusing on it. We're focusing on all this superficial stuff. So the focus group, what they can do, first of all, they need to talk about the problem, the issue that's going on in the church. Fix what's going on with them first. They need some self-correction, some self-analysis, which we talked about the challenges. Once they do that, then they can come and try to help by establishing this focus group. The church has to lead this effort. Because, like I said, it's the only institution that's been there for black people since slavery. And it's the only one that's going to continue to be there. But the problem is where are the black people going to go? Because eventually this high crime rate, this high murder rate is going to start hitting the membership. Because after a while, it's just like a bunch of devils. And that's what has laying hellish eggs, has some young devils. Them devils gonna come after the church. Nobody's a victim to us, so we need to go ahead and start getting everything together and work on things. And then we also need to talk about economic job creation. And if you have a church in a particular neighborhood, you know, you have a church in here, then you have a vacant lot for abandoned building, all these different things, or in the church in every respective community. Why the church cannot sit around here and create income or create jobs by opening, you know, a store here, a corner store. Quit letting everybody else come to our black neighborhood and take money out. The church needs to stand behind it. Get their resources together, buy their community church, or community building, community store. You got vacant property, real estate, you know, houses. People, they're homeless people. There are people that can't afford their rent. There are people that's going through trouble. Make those houses vacant. But don't just give it to them, teach them or something. Give them a 2 to 3 year plan and say, this is the plan we're going to do to build your credit on home buying, on home ownership. These are what we're going to need to do, how to get your credit in order, how to do all these different things. Okay, because the church has to take the lead in that. Because once you do that, you're investing into the community. And then the way the church is being viewed right now, that can be lessened a little bit because they're realizing that, you know what, the church is interested in saving this community. It's not just about filling their pockets. You know, they taking a stand, so that's what we need to do. We also need to figure out how we're going to deal with this juvenile justice system problem, the crime rate, the poor education. I mean, the high school education dropout rate for blacks have increased, but it's still 10% is too high. You know, because that's going to filter additional problems. We need to develop a social agenda. How are we going to attack these problems, and what we're going to do leading on to this thing. But the whole key thing about developing a social agenda is that you have to decide what's more important at this particular point in time. You know, when President Obama, this past week, he gave his State of the Union address. And he outlined his strategies and goals for the year as far as the economy goes, lowering crime rate. He also talked about raising minimum wage, And other thing, he also talked about what his administration was able to do in the past 6 years, 5, 6 years that he's been in office. But that's what we also need to do here. We need to set up a State of the Union address amongst leaders all over Knoxville. And that could be UT, KC, if it's still open or whatever, and just go ahead and get everything started. And once we sit from there, then we can develop a game plan in order to how to tackle it. Then you can outsource. What I mean by outsource, when you go to some churches, and with smaller churches, I understand that, but you have some medium to large churches, even mega-sized churches, stop letting everything be clergy dominated. That means a person that's in charge of minister of finances, and then everybody's associated with the church, and that's fine. But there are certain things you have to do that you can take outside the church. For instance, you can hire an accountant that's going to come in and handle your books. So therefore, that will remove the suspicion of somebody tackling with money because it's from an outside source. And it also, they can hire secretaries, they can hire different people from outside, and what it's doing, that's bringing people from the outside into the church, and it's also opened another avenue for the church to reach other people. But until they step in, they start to do this, it's going to always be that way. So I think that's a wonderful way the churches can go ahead and bridge the gap. And then the balance between priestly and there should be prophetic function, not prosperity. Priestly functions basically deal with how the church should act. As far as the turn of the service, the songs, the worship, what we do here is more or less what we're seeing now, where the church really doesn't, it's to itself. And the rest of the world is outside. We're not like them. They're not of the world like we are. They just want to keep to themselves and deal with their own problem. And priestly function in this